Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're doing well and I hope you're having a lovely week. Thank you for joining me today. I understand that there are a lot of people with a lot of questions. So, just to specify how this is going to work, today and as usual now, questions will be taken from the Telegram group. So, whatever questions you have for me, please put them in the Telegram group and I will pick them up. So, this week has been a very, very busy week for me and for the team. I was in Cambridge yesterday. I met with the professors in the afternoon. I had lunch with them, in fact, and we discussed basically research topics, things that where we're going to work together, what those areas are going to be, because this is required for the phase that we're in today, which is contracting with the university. We're in today, which is contracting with the university. So we've come up with some topics, we've come up with some areas that we're going to be collaborating on. And yeah, so things are moving ahead very well. I also had dinner with Arm in the evening. And yeah, it was a very lovely It was a very lovely dinner, actually. We discussed new collaboration opportunities. There's something new that I'm very excited about, but I can't speak about yet because it's not been finalized. It's an opportunity that we discussed. So overall, it was very productive. I also met with some PhD students. I met with some master's students. I met with some undergraduates, some very, very smart people. I met with some people that have specialized in distributed systems and decentralized systems, people that are working on different sort of consensus algorithms for the likes of Microsoft and such. So it was a very, very productive day that I had in Cambridge. And yeah, so that's kind of what happened. And then, like I said, in the evening, I had dinner with Arm, and we discussed some new opportunities and something very exciting, actually. But I can't discuss it yet, simply because I'm not allowed to. So in the past week or so, there's been a lot of turmoil in the community with regards to Unlock. I'm not quite sure why that's the case. I don't know what's happened. Maybe it's the rising market and some impatience. But I've got to stress how important it is that as a community that we stick together and that we come together and that we work together. There is nobody that owns tokens today. Nobody. Except the team, of course. There's nobody that owns more than 0.15% of tokens. Nobody. If nobody owns 0.15% of tokens, more than that's like, you know, a sixth of 1%. If nobody, something like that. If nobody owns more than that many tokens, I can't stress how important it is that as a community, right, you know, working together and sticking together and operating as one group serves everybody. You know, and I don't mean to sound communist here, but the reality is that, you know, your fate in this rests in your collective hands. Rests in your collective hands. So very early in the week, I came into the group. I think it was early in the week, to dispel some of the fighting that was going on inside of our group. And I was very disappointed to see this, because at the end of the day, right, we're dependent on each other. We've got to come together, right? But anyway, and I mentioned that we would have a vote, and I want to talk about that because I think a lot of people have asked for clarification on, you know, how that would work, why we would have a vote, what the implications are on the masternode. I mean, sorry, on the mainnet and such. So let's get into detail and let's talk about some of these things. So one of the questions is, you know, mainnet at the end of the year. Are we going to have a mainnet at the end of the year? Yes, we have a mainnet coming out at the end of this year. That mainnet is currently in testing, right? Meaning, what that means is that the development of the mainnet is finished. But before we can really appreciate, and I've spent some time thinking about this and thinking about, what are the implications here? And what are the implications here on the token and everything else? So I think we first need to understand, what does mainnet mean, and how is mainnet different to testnet? So in many projects, well, I won't name them, but you can go see for yourself. In many projects, testnet means proof of concept. So for example, if a project is claiming that they've solved a problem with TPS, maybe through sharding or whatever it might be, right? Their testnet tends to mean, generally speaking, tends to mean that here's the component that we, that's at the heart of our white paper, and we've developed this component, and here we're showing you that the core idea at the heart of our white paper is validated. It's almost like a proof of concept, if you will, right? So then what's the difference between testnet and mainnet? Well, mainnet is a fully functional product. A fully functional product means, new people can sign up, and people can use the product, and people can deploy code or whatever it might be to the product. People can use the product. It's not just a proof of concept or a proof of the idea, right? Or it's not where you can just test out whether the claim that they're making, or the idea that's central to what they're creating, is true or not. But it's a functional, usable product. So what does this mean for us? It means that we will have a fully functional, usable, decentralized cloud that's made available for people to use at the end of this year, right? I don't anticipate delays to this. Like I said, we're in the testing phase. I think the risk of delay is minimal at this point in time. Now, it's possible something crops out of the woodwork, but I don't anticipate that at this point, or at this stage. So how does this relate to unlock? And what does all of this mean? How are the two related to one another? Or are the two dependent on one another? So does it necessarily mean that we have to unlock tokens in December because the mainnet is available and ready to use? Not necessarily, right? If market conditions aren't supportive of a token unlock at the end of this year, does it make sense for us to unlock tokens at the end of the year? Right? I don't think so. If, for example, there's a reversal in the trend. Right now, things look pretty stable, right? If in a couple of weeks there's a reversal in the trend and the market, drops significantly, does that mean that because mainnet's coming out, we should automatically unlock tokens? I don't think so. I don't think that the tokens provide an incentive for people to contribute devices. But just like the open source community, right? Is there necessarily an incentive for people to contribute code to the open source community? No, there isn't. People still contribute code. So will people contribute devices, to a mainnet if there's no token at that point in time at the end of this year? Yeah, I think that people will contribute devices. We'll contribute devices too, in fact, because we'll obviously want to make sure that there's a functional, usable mainnet at the end of this year. So in the past, in previous AMAs, I have said that if we get to December and we have not unlocked tokens, then we will have a community vote for the unlock of the token, right? Because you should have a role in, this isn't an autocracy. You should have a role and a voice in this process. Now, naturally, only people who have paid for tokens should get the right to participate in the vote. And your vote should be, the number of votes, for example, that you have should be commensurate to the number of tokens that you have. So if you own 100 tokens, you have 100 votes. If you own 1,000 tokens, you have 1,000 votes, and so forth. So we will have a vote in December, because I said, I'm living up to the promise I made probably about a month or two ago, saying that we will have a vote if we get to December. And it looks like, we may possibly get to December. However, if the market turns around and in the next week or 2 or 3 or whatever, and things explode and the market takes off, then it may be time for us to unlock. If the market, if we get to a point where it's not, that the market conditions don't suggest that it's time to unlock, and we'll talk about what that means in a moment. If we get to a point where market conditions don't look like it's time to unlock, right, then you guys will have the chance to be able to make a decision. And only token holders will be able to vote. You'll vote in accordance or commensurate with the number of tokens you hold. And the decision will be in your hands, collectively as a community. We have to make a collective decision, right? Because at the end of the day, this impacts all of you guys. It impacts an entire community. It doesn't impact you individually as a person. So while one individual may want us to stay locked and another individual may want us to unlock, right? Some people want, that they're bastions of the free market. They think the free market should rule in all circumstances, and therefore we should just release the token and shouldn't care about what market conditions are. And it doesn't matter what happens to the token in the short term. Who's right, who's wrong? At the end of the day, it's the will of the community that matters here, not the will of an individual, right? So let's talk about that. These ultra right-wing individuals. And I lived in America for 12 years. Believe me, I understand the right-wing method, the right-wing way of thinking. So, what about these guys, these people who say, well, it's not up to us and we shouldn't be holding tokens and, whatever they're saying, we shouldn't be keeping tokens locked. Well, my perspective on that is very simple. We live in an era where projects live and die by their community, right? Whether people contribute to our project, whether it's contributing code, whether it's contributing, support, whether it's contributing their devices, we're dependent on the community. The community is paramount to our success. Our reputation is determined by the community, right? To give you an example, the professor that I met yesterday, Professor John Crowcroft, a juggernaut in computing. His name was recommended to me by Anastasia, a member of our community. Right now, I had independently found his team and the work that they do at Cambridge, but her recommendation validated that I was looking in the right places, right? So the community does contribute to this project, whether you realize it or not. There's partnerships and relationships and exchanges that we speak to and all sorts of stuff that come to us from the community. Without a community, we would be at peril. It would be detrimental to us if we didn't have a community. Another reason why the community is really important is to share news and to share information. If we sign a new major partnership, how does that news get disseminated to the wider community? We depend on the community to do that for us. We depend on a vibrant and excited community. Now, if we'd released our tokens 2 months ago, and like projects that were releasing at that point in time, they dropped to 1/10 their value, 90% of the value, wiped off the value of the token. Firstly, people would say we're a scam. Secondly, the FUDers would say we're right. And thirdly, our community would evaporate, literally, instantly evaporate. So it's in the project's interests. Let me be clear. It's in Sparkster's interests to serve the community. And I want to say this more broadly, in fact. It's in any project's interests to serve their community. Those projects that scam their community, those projects that hurt their community, that do illicit deals behind the community's backs, that steal tokens or sell tokens, without telling the community. In my opinion, they're killing the long-term prospects of their own project. So for the reasons that I've just mentioned in the last few minutes, it's paramount and it's extremely important that we are acting all the time in the interests of the community. And it's also important that we're transparent with the community. So this is my position and my perspective on unlocking, on, are we, and I'll talk in a moment, are we at the time to unlock and what are we looking for, right? But hopefully I've explained why tokens are locked or still locked, why we are acting in the interest of the community, why this is important to the future of our token. Let's talk about, I want to remind some people about why we lock tokens in the first place. So as soon as we completed distribution of the tokens, so we held the crowd sale, right? Then we had an external third-party audit of our sale because of the regulations of the jurisdiction we're in. This was required, right? So there was an audit, a KYC audit conducted, and an AML audit conducted, and then we distributed tokens, right? And we promised that process would take 2 weeks. We delivered those tokens early, less than 2 weeks of time, and the market fell off the cliff. We had no intention of delaying unlock. Let's be clear. We had no intention of delaying unlock, but the market fell off the cliff and it began to fall substantially and precipitously. So we made the decision that it's not in the interest of the community, it's not in the interest of token holders to unlock tokens at that point in time. We entered a deep bear market, or I should say the deep bear market continued and exasperated. But now I'm happy to say that we have reached, in my opinion, a semblance of stability. We are seeing stability in the market. I believe we've reached, the market has bottomed out, right? So, and I hope that that's the case. I hope that continues, right? Some people are saying, well, we're not there yet, that Bitcoin's going to fall to 5,000. Who knows? I don't know. I'm not a speculator of any nature, and nor am I someone that can predict the future, right? All I can tell you is, do I see, and do our team and our advisors see that now is the time to release tokens? The answer to that question is no, right? So previously I've mentioned that, we're looking at other projects to see what happens to those projects, to see, if those projects rise above ICO price. And in the vast majority of cases, that's not the case. That is not the case, that projects are above their ICO price. So now people say, well, there's really no projects left. What are we going to observe to be able to make this determination? And I think that that's the problem with that, is that people don't understand the question behind the question. And you have to look a little bit deeper into what are we really looking for. We're looking for, have exchange buyers returned? Have exchange buyers returned? In the past, there used to be two groups of people. There used to be the types of people that participated in pre-sales and token sales and whatever. And then there were the people that purchased on exchanges, right? The question behind the question is, have those people returned? We don't see evidence that those people have returned, right? But now the decision will be in your hands. As a community, you will collectively decide, should we unlock tokens in December? And if you feel that we shouldn't unlock tokens in December, then we will decide at what point in time should we have another vote if we haven't already unlocked tokens by that point. And so we will continue this process of evaluation, but giving you the opportunity to participate and exercise your vote in the process. So hopefully I've covered why the tokens were unlocked, why the tokens were locked in the first place, why the tokens continue to be locked, what we're looking for, whether we feel that that those conditions have returned, what this has to do with mainnet, and all of those things. I hope that I've covered the vast majority of questions that people have had this week. And once again, I want to remind you again, nobody owns more than 0.15% of tokens. And therefore, the success or failure of this project is in your hands collectively as a community, right? Um, if you guys decide that we're doing good things, we're working hard, which hopefully you guys see, we're working excruciatingly hard, that we're working on continually adding value to the project and continually delivering on and exceeding the promises that we made about the project. You know, we promised you technology, but we're working on, and we promised you a real business, you know, and hopefully you see that we're working extremely hard to make that a reality, doing everything we possibly can to make that a reality. So, and I hope that the impact of that is that you guys stick with us in the long run, right? So, let's take some questions. I was sent some questions prior to this that I'm going to look through now. So one of the questions is on the topic of partnerships. Can I talk about lessons learned, hurdles that we're encountering, and whether there are companies that are, you know, whether they're giving us, you know, positive indicators or not. This individual who asked this question, I won't name them. They operate or they work in the telco industry, and they're saying that in their experience, companies tend to use tested products with reference implementations. Are we seeing the same? That's a really good question. So I appreciate the question from the community member who asked it. The answer is yes and no. So let me explain. If we go to the operations team of a company and we say, hey guys, we want you to think about decentralized cloud computing, that's not on their radar. Those types of, you know, teams and people are indeed looking for reference implementations. They're looking for tried and tested products. However, within the same companies, and generally speaking, you know, we're talking to larger companies. So generally speaking, you know, in these larger companies, there are departments and divisions that are researching technologies or experimenting with technologies. And when you talk to those teams and those departments, they're very interested in what we're talking about. So the thing is that if you target the right team in the right sorts of companies, you know, if you talk to, like, you know, a small company, a local retailer, for example, you know, obviously they don't have such research teams. But if you're talking to large companies, they are and generally are researching technologies. And if you're speaking to those departments, they're very receptive and they want to hear from new companies and people with new technologies and so forth. And we are targeting, or Shabir spends a lot of his time targeting those types of teams and such, of a lot of large companies. So thank you for the question. I'll take one from the main group. So Anastasia is asking, is it possible to arrange a roundtable or a conference between Cambridge and ARM to discuss the fifth wave of computing? Invite companies from Fortune 500 companies and researchers and such. I do. I think that that is possible, yes. And I think that we can chair that. I think we can lead that effort. I know that it's possible for us to go and speak at, I think, both institutions. I certainly know that we can go and speak at ARM, and I believe we can. I believe that you know, there won't be a challenge for us to go and speak at Cambridge. And yes, we can bring these two together. So right now, right at this moment, what I'm currently focused on is we're in the midst of drafting a proposal, and this is essentially the details of everything that we're going to be doing together between the various organizations, between Cambridge and ARM, and what we're working on and what everyone's going to be doing and such. So, you know, this is a detailed proposal that needs to be put together, or yeah. and we're in the midst of drafting that. So um, once this is done and out of the way, I think that we can come back to focusing on those sorts of things. Um, what's interesting is that this has really come, all of this has come off of the back of the speaking engagement that we had at ARM TechCon. We're speaking to the research team. And we weren't previously speaking to research at ARM. We were speaking to their partnership team and commercial teams and such, right? We're now speaking to the research team at ARM, and they're tremendous people. Now we can speak to them because we're partners of ARM, right? And they're receptive to what we're saying because we're partners of ARM. So by speaking with working with the research team, what's really, really good about working with ARM's research team is that we get to collaborate with them. I don't want to give too much away. Let's just say we get to really, really collaborate with them, right? I don't want to take away from a future announcement. So let's just say that we really, really get to collaborate with them. And it's a wonderful thing because, it's a wonderful thing. Just take it as that. And naturally, in the academic environment, they're working on cutting edge stuff. Professor Crowcroft, when I was meeting with them, he was telling me that some of the stuff that we're talking about commercializing today, they wrote, they, as in he and his colleagues, wrote papers about, academic papers about, more than 20 years ago. So you can imagine that they're excited about working with a company like us to commercialize some of this stuff, right? So Metronome is asking, he's asking about the PR relationship that we have with Marlin. So I'm going to answer the second part of your question first because it's shorter, and then I'll come to the first part of your question because it's a little bit longer. Is the PR company going to help us foster relationships with large organizations like ARM? Not directly. Remember that they work with marketing departments, right? They work with marketing departments. Are they directly going to say, hey, you can speak to the research department here? No, they create awareness and they create publicity. However, we are working on large partnerships, and we are, as in Shabir's job, that's what he's paid to do, is to work on large collaborations the size of ARM. So that's the short answer to that question. Let's talk about Marlin and the PR agency and what they're tasked with and what they're going to be working on and such. The activities of our PR agency is to generate customers, to generate users, right? We, from the very beginning, have talked about adoption. Our mission is adoption, right? We want to be one of the few companies in the space to really have adoption materialize, to have products that people use, not just products. We've said from the very beginning, we're not trying to build highways in a desolate city, right? We've built products that solve real problems for real people in the real world. And Marlin's job is to bring us customers for these products. And so that's what they're going to do. We've worked with them to identify profiles of different types of people, whether they're individuals, what they do, how old they are, personas, as it's known in the marketing world, personas of different types and categories of people that we're targeting. So for example, one of the personas, they named him Rajesh. He's like a CIO in a large company. So to go back to your second question, right? They're not directly going to make introductions, but for example, through targeting people who are like CIOs in large companies, Marlin is going to get to create awareness of what Sparkster is doing and the impact that Sparkster has on them in their business, in for their workforce, for and in their areas of business. Get that message in front of those types of people. For people that will be building the applications of the future, Marlin, I think the name of that particular persona was Alberto, if I'm not mistaken. So they will make sure that messaging that's appropriate for Alberto is delivered to the likes of Alberto in places that Alberto hangs out. So, for example, he might be reading The Verge magazine, right? So we want to make sure that the types of people who are inclined to build applications, inclined to solve problems, we're making sure that our message is reaching them in the right places. This is the type of things that we're working on defining with Marlin, and the type of work that Marlin will be doing. Their job is to create real, material, substantial, or substantive value in the form of customers of our products and the things that we're building. So I hope that answers your questions. So Richard's asking, do we plan to provide support to the community before and after the unlock? Yeah, absolutely. We're not going anywhere. I'll still be here, and I'll continue to be communicating with the community, keeping you updated in terms of what's going on. You know, and this kind of leads on to something else I heard earlier on in the week. I've had an extremely busy week, so I have not had the opportunity to stay engaged with the community too much. But it was brought to my attention that some people seem to be suggesting that we somehow benefit from. Some people think we benefit from keeping the tokens locked. Other people seem to think that we benefit from from unlocking the tokens, and somehow that's going to create liquidity. The unlock process doesn't impact us from a liquidity from a liquidity perspective. Our liquidity comes from what happens to the price of ETH, not what happens to the price of Spark. Not in the short term, right? Because our tokens are locked for 2 years from the date of unlock. So, we don't directly benefit in any way. We're not like some other teams that are offloading tokens, immediately upon listing. That will not happen here. Yeah, so hopefully that answers that question. So, and then somebody has asked for me to clarify the sorts of hardware that would be required for somebody to run a masternode. I think this is an important question, and I appreciate the question, so thank you. Right? The type of hardware. So your computer needs to, at least in the short term, needs to support Intel SGX. So you can go and look up what SGX is, right? It's basically like an enclave. It's a secure part of the processor where logic can run securely within the processor. You require a newer sort of computer to be able to run SGX. And yes, desktop computers do ship with SGX capabilities. So if you're buying if you have a computer that was purchased in the last year or two, you should be SGX compliant. SGX is an Intel technology, but Intel is not the only company that produces secure enclave technology. So ARM, our partner ARM, who make the processor inside of your iPad, for example, or your iPhone, is an ARM processor. Those processors come with something called Trust Zone. Yes, called Trust Zone. We were speaking about that with the Cambridge folks yesterday. So, so in the future, I hope to be able to support Trust Zone. Although in the first few iterations, the first few versions of the of mainnet, we won't be supporting ARM devices or ARM processors for mainnet for masternodes. So thank you for the question. A following question is, are we engaged in some form of speculation by keeping our funds in ETH? No. If It's an interesting question. If we were moving our tokens, if we were moving our ETH, back and forth between currencies, I'd say that we were engaged in speculation, right? We collected the funds in ETH. We're keeping the funds in ETH. That's not engaged in speculation. If we were moving them from one currency to another currency, you know, I call that speculation. So no, we're not engaged in any form of speculation. So Ken is asking, and I appreciate this question, Ken. If mainnet can operate without tokens, what's the use of the token? So the token does a few things, right? Number one, the token provides an incentive for people to contribute their devices, right? Now, can we expect to be able to produce a scalable system where people don't get compensated for contributing their devices? No. I don't think you can produce something scalable without having people be compensated for contributing their devices. Can we launch a mainnet without compensating people in the immediate term and expect people to contribute devices? I think we can. I think people in our community who support our project would be willing to contribute devices, right? And in the short term, to test it out, to see how this stuff works, to help us test this out and to see how this all works. So yes. So what's the use of the token? The token does several things. If you go to sparkster.me/FAQ, we discussed this extensively. But let me give you some of those examples, right? So it provides a mechanism, obviously, to reward people for contributing their devices. But the algorithm is proof of stake. So what this means is that once the token is integrated, you have to have tokens at stake to participate in the network. Why do you have to have tokens at stake? Because if you engage in some form of illicit behavior, if you try and hack the network, if you if you try and overpower the network, if you try and modify blocks, or if you're engaged in anything illicit, you lose your stake. Now, I think this is superior to proof of work, and these are not my words that I'm about to say, there's somebody else's, but somebody once said that proof of stake, if you're caught cheating in proof of stake, it's like being caught cheating and then setting the entire mining farm of that individual on fire, because they can never come back and participate in the network. So you have skin in the game in a proof of stake environment. So the tokens enable you to have something at stake. But the tokens provide a mechanism for determining the allocation of work, right? So if two people are contributing their devices, who should get the right to execute that piece of work, that workload? Well, there's an algorithm, a proprietary algorithm that's specified in our white paper. You can see the mathematics of it at the end of the white paper, that determines the probability distribution method of someone or a particular individual or node winning the right to execute a transaction. And the probability is based on the number of tokens you stake. More tokens you stake, greater the probability. So it solves problems in scheduling, and it solves problems. These are deep theoretical problems. Some of them we were talking about yesterday, actually. Solves problems in scheduling. It solves problems essentially determining how to orchestrate work in a network in an efficient way. And there are more things in there discussed at sparkster.me/FAQ. So that is what the token does. That is why it's a utility token, and that's why it's critical and necessary to the operating of the network. Medium term, long term, the network needs this to operate. However, I think in the short run, can we get up and running without it? Yes. So, Investico is asking, he knows that there's a Forbes article in the works, And he wants to know if the information about Cambridge will be included in the article. So let me shed some light on what's going on with the Forbes article. The article's been written, it's been submitted to Forbes. Forbes is under no obligation to publish our article. If they don't take this article, we'll send them another article in the hopes that they'll publish that article. But so far, they've not published the article that we've sent them. So, we'll write another one and we'll submit it to Forbes. And we'll take the one that we wrote to Forbes and we'll send it somewhere else in the hopes that, another magazine may publish it. So, have we included the information about Cambridge in Forbes? No, not yet, because the article was written and sent to them before we had anything meaningful going on with Cambridge. When marketing plan it will be active, Man is asking. The marketing plan will be active. Well, we're in the process of recruiting people right now for marketing. We need to expand our team, and so this is what we're working on. We have had more than 60 applications for the role, but we want to make sure the people that we hire are people that are going to actually be able to have an impact and help us. So those 60 people have received a task from us, so we can see if they're going to be effective in the role. We can't just hire someone because they say that they're good. We want to know that they're going to be able to actually have an impact, and also determine how much do they really want to work for Sparkster. So we're in the process of recruiting. So Nutter is saying, so no tokens, no form of preventing bad network behavior. Well, that's in the short term, right? In the short term, it means that it means that what we will have is we will have a network where people will be able to get up and running and play around with it and begin looking at the sorts of things that they might want to create and might want to run on the network. And obviously, it's in nobody's interest to keep tokens locked for too long, right? Nobody benefits from that. We certainly don't want to have a situation where the community tears itself apart because of this situation. And unfortunately, I felt like that was happening earlier in the week. But hopefully the clarity that I've now given you around the voting process and around how this stuff will work puts these concerns to rest. But like I said, we're dependent on one another. Everybody benefits from us all working together collaboratively and being on the same team. That doesn't mean that we all need to agree all the time. We don't need to all agree this all the time. So yeah. And there's an opportunity for us to express our views and such. So Valerie's asking how many tokens for the masternode. So in the past, we've said that, we're looking in the region of somewhere around, 100 to 150,000 tokens. Our estimates on this have not changed. In fact, I'm looking at ways that we might be able to reduce that. We're always about greater participation. So we're looking, and we haven't been able to conclude this yet because we've got so much going on. But in essence, I'm looking if it's plausible for us to have it be less than 100 to 150,000 tokens. And if it can be, it will be. I believe in greater participation. So don't worry, it's not going to be, it's ideally, it will be less than 100,000 tokens, but it won't be more than 150,000 tokens. How do you stake? You'll send the tokens to a contract. And because they're ETH tokens, they're ETH-based tokens. That's another interesting point. People are asking about, or have in the past asked about, the people in the past have asked about, how can we run a network and not host our own token? Nobody does that. Well, that might be true. I don't know if anybody else has done that. But you got to realize that we're not like other people. We've not created a currency. We're not creating a platform on which you're going to run an ICO, and therefore the token itself is important because you want people to hold that token. We're not that, right? We're a decentralized cloud where you run software, right? And I've explained 5 minutes ago what the token does, but that doesn't mean that it needs to be hosted by us. It can be hosted by somebody else. It can be run by somebody else on somebody else's technology, because our technology is about how do you run software in a decentralized way that makes a difference to people. So this is why we focused our development efforts on where we contribute value, not in reinventing the wheel, but on doing the things that other people are not focused on as a problem case. So Crypto Penguin's asking, what does 10 million TPS really mean? 10 million TPS means, as a TPS number, means throughput. It means the number of transactions that can be processed per second in the network, right? So why is this really important? I mean, it's absolutely critical to the future of computing, to the future of a network, for example. So think about Amazon, right? How does Amazon increase its TPS? How does Amazon increase its TPS? It adds another node. It adds another server. That server is capable of, performing more work, and therefore Amazon's TPS is increased, right? Why is that the case? Why does it work for Amazon? Well, it works for Amazon. And by the way, with Amazon, you might say that there's theoretically no limit to the number of applications that potentially could run in Amazon. And I'll clarify that in a moment. So the way that that's possible is that they have different companies running on different servers. Now, what's the drawback of Amazon's environment? The drawback of Amazon's environment is that you then have to worry about if the number of customers you have exceeds the capabilities provided by one virtual machine or one server. You then have to worry about taking your application and spanning that across multiple servers. And you have to worry about how to architect and design your application to work in that way. And, that requires specialist knowledge in software architecture, in that specific type of software architecture. So when you design applications for Sparkster's decentralized cloud, or within Sparkster's decentralized cloud using Sparkster's no-code platform, you don't have to ever worry about how is my application going to scale, because that's what you get for free. So you can take the necessity of knowing and thinking about and worrying about and designing distribution into the platform, and you don't need to invest development resources into this type of architecture. It comes to you by virtue of the design of the network itself. So what we're saying is that, okay, the network needs to have millions of TPS because it needs to be competitive with Amazon. Amazon can scale by adding a server and therefore scale its TPS. Sparkster can scale by adding a cell and increasing its TPS linearly. Right now, a sharded network cannot linearly scale its TPS. Now I'll say that again. A sharded network cannot linearly increase its TPS. What that means is that there's not, for example, let's say that for every node that I add to a sharded network, you don't get a 2x increase. 2 is arbitrary, but you don't get, let's say that it's 2x. You don't get a 2x increase in TPS. So when you add the second node, it may be 2x. When you add the third node, it may be 1.8x. When you add the fourth node, it may be 1.6x, right? There's diminishing returns. There's diminishing returns to adding nodes to a sharded network. That is not the case with Sparkster. That is not the case with Sparkster. We have a shared nothing architecture. We have true isolation, and that true isolation gives rise to true parallelism. And what that means is that if it was 2x, let's say, then every cell that gets added is actually a 2x increase in TPS, or a 1x increase, or whatever the x is. It is actually that. There's no diminishing returns. And that's what makes the network and our specific architecture and our design unique. But that being said, there's drawbacks, right? And those drawbacks are that you're not going to run a currency on our network, right? Because it's not designed to run a currency. Because you can't run a currency on a shared nothing architecture. You can run software on a shared nothing architecture because software has what's called natural isolation boundaries. I've mentioned this many times before, but if anyone's new, I'll mention it again. Natural isolation boundaries mean that you don't ever need to see my Uber Eats history. You don't need to know what I have for dinner every now and then, and I don't need to know what you have for dinner every now and then, right? Or whenever you use Uber Eats. And so, because I don't need to know what you eat, and you don't need to know what I eat, there's no need for us to ever synchronize that information. Therefore, there's never a need for us to be on the same DHT. And therefore, we can take these two separate pieces of information and we can put them into two separate cells. And Uber Eats as an application can increase in TPS or can scale across the network in terms of TPS because it can put your transactions in a different cell to my transactions and somebody else's transactions in a different cell to our cells. And therefore, the application can have high TPS. So hopefully that's an elaborate answer to your question. Is it true that a decentralized network can never have greater speed than a centralized network? Is it true that no, it's not true. That's not true. And this goes to the heart of what we're talking to Cambridge about. This is an optimization problem, right? I don't want to go into too much detail about it because I don't want... let's just say, look, there's an optimization problem here, and it's an interesting optimization problem because it depends on how you distribute your application that determines the answer to this question, right? So, but the short answer to this question is no. That is not necessarily true. However, there is a fundamental problem with centralized computing. And that fundamental problem is what was evidenced by ARM in their vision for the fifth wave of computing. And that is the centralized clouds and centralized environments are uneconomical, too slow from a latency perspective. I was reading a paper the other day. I was reading a research paper that said that the latency between Canberra, this is a quote, from Canberra to Berkeley is 175 milliseconds. 175 milliseconds. Now, if your data or your system was hosted in, near Berkeley, in San Francisco or somewhere in that area, and two cars were trying to communicate with each other through a centralized cloud, maybe they want to tell each other, hey, I'm about to crash into you, or I'm getting awfully close to you. You might want to get out of my way, or you might want to speed up, or whatever, right? Or slow down, or whatever it might be. That communication, if it was dependent on that, that journey that I just mentioned, those two cars would crash into each other. Put that on a decentralized network where the two cars can talk to each other, and because they're talking to each other on a node that's near one another, if they're talking to each other on a node that's close to both of those two cars, you can take that communication time frame down from 175 milliseconds down to less than 10 milliseconds, right? That's, at least an order of magnitude improvement. So that's the difference between saving people's lives and not, right? So, there are real, valuable, meaningful, powerful use cases um, that we are exploring right now with our partners. And these are the sorts of things that we're talking about with our partners. So Natsa is asking, is there a way to select the closest compute node? That's the idea. And that's what I was talking about yesterday with the folks at Cambridge. I hope there's no competitors watching this, but essentially this is what we're working on. So there are real, powerful, valuable use cases for the technology we're building. There are use cases that will save lives. There are use cases that, the centralized cloud. Piece together what I'm saying, right? This is all happening because the future of cloud computing, that the future isn't centralized, that you can't cram all of this data from all of these devices into these clouds because it can't get there fast enough, because the clouds can't process it fast enough. Think about the examples that we've given in the past. The fact that if everybody used if everybody who has Google Assistant used Google Assistant for 3 minutes a day, they would need to take all the servers that are powering Google Cloud and double them, right? That they couldn't handle that. Circuitry and the amount of bandwidth that's flowing into these centralized data centers, would be overwhelmed if we brought online these sorts of use cases that I've mentioned. That these billions, and we talked about a billion cell phones, a billion mobile phones, and the pictures being taken by them. That if just 1 billion, the pictures taken in 1 month from 1 billion phones is 400 exabytes of data, and requires 40 million servers to process those. You've got bandwidth problems. You don't have enough servers to process all of this stuff. So the future necessitates the technology we're working on, right? And we're working on the sorts of problems and the sorts of optimization techniques that will ensure that the things that we've built become pivotal to realizing that future. That's what is at the heart of this collaboration. So, guys, we've been together an hour, and I want to thank everybody for their questions. I truly, truly hope that you have found today to be valuable, and insightful, and I hope you've gained value from it. I hope you really see the value in what we're doing here, and the hard work from the team and everybody else that's trying to make this a reality. And I hope that you see that, we're really and honestly working as hard as we can to create something incredibly valuable to the world, and incredibly valuable to you as the community that has backed us. And I hope today that we've explained our thought process, and explained and justified why we've locked tokens, why tokens are still locked, and the decision will ultimately be in your hands. And I think that the question you should ask yourself when it comes to the day when you do make that decision about unlocking is, have exchange buyers returned? That's the real question I'm asking myself. Thank you. no matter what happens, I'm here with you, and I will be here with you. Um, no matter what the outcome is, we'll be here continuing to build this project because this is our life's work. So thank you.